Can you hear? Okay, before Pete gets started, a few things coming up. Next month on the 13th or 14th, that Wednesday of November, we'll have Paul Zoros, who will be coming down from Chester. And he's not sure of the topic yet, but we'll be here. It's just a couple weeks. We're trying to avoid Thanksgiving week by having it the second week in November. December 14th, we'll be having our Christmas gathering, our luncheon, at Melman's on the 14th. That'll be a Saturday at 12 o'clock. Monday, January, we're going to just have a super officers meeting rather than go ahead and schedule because of weather, anticipation, bad weather, and a few other things. And in February, we're going to have something different. There'll be a discussion on secession. Tom had a good idea, the idea of controversial issues surrounding, what's the name of the book, Tom, that you mentioned? The name of the book.
Seceding from secession.
Seceding from secession. So we have an actual roundtable that we can discuss. Well, maybe you should go ahead and pull some of these tables out and have an actual roundtable, because seldom do we have an actual roundtable discussion. It's somebody coming in for a lecture. So that takes us up through February, and then the plans for the rest of the year are in the making. So that's what's going on, and I'm going to have our Vice President introduce our speaker tonight.
No.
Martin Lewis here. Abbott and Costello.
Well, I'll introduce myself. I think most of you know me, Pete Chonkalis. Tonight's topic is going to be the chosen Imboden raid through north central West Virginia. Actually, at that time, it was still Virginia. I'm going to go in and out here so I can change slides here. First thing is I want to look at the B&O Railroad, because that's what the raid was designed to do, to impact the B&O. The B&O was from Baltimore to Wheeling. There was an offshoot right there, which was referred to as the Northwestern Virginia Railroad between Parkersburg and Grafton. The B&O was about 397 miles long. It became one of the most important military railroads for the North. It connected the Potomac River near Washington with the Midwest. Of course, Ohio was referred to as the Midwest at that time. And its vast wealth of supplies, men, could easily make their way from the Midwest to Washington and then off to whatever theater where they were going to go to. Now, the one thing, a little offshoot here that I want to mention, you can see where the state of West Virginia became. When the state became officially a state on June 20th of 1863, there were 48 counties. The two counties right here, Berkeley County and Jefferson County, they were not originally part of the state on June the 20th. But if you look, if those two counties are still in Virginia, there's a problem, because we can't possibly have the B&O Railroad go through enemy territory. So those two counties were added later, Berkeley in August of 1863 and Jefferson in November of 1863. Folks, if you're just coming in, you can grab a map there if you would like. Go help explain some things. So it was vital to keep the B&O entirely within the confines of the Union. The president of the B&O was John Garrett, and John Garrett was a Southern sympathizer. So as the war began, he proposed to remain neutral. The B&O would not carry men or troops or anything for either side. Well, that will soon become an issue, because when George McClellan began his invasion of Western Virginia, he sent a message to Colonel Benjamin Franklin Kelly, who was commanding the 1st Virginia Infantry at Camp Carlisle on the Wheeling Island: get yourself and your troops to Grafton. So Kelly calls the B&O station, and he wanted to secure transportation to go to Grafton. Well, they told him no, and he was absolutely livid. So he sent the following message to the B&O agent: this is war. Railroad companies cannot be their own masters. They are to serve the government that guarantees to them possession and protection of their property. You have a train of cars in the depot tomorrow morning at 4 o'clock, or I will place you in prison and take possession of your railroad by military authority. Well, there was a prison just next door. The Athenaeum, which stood where the West Virginia Northern Community College quadrangle is, was there at the time. The second floor of that building was used as a prison. Later on, the entire building will be converted to use as a prison. Well, guess what? At 4 o'clock in the morning, there was a train of cars waiting there for him. So, even though, let me go back a slide real quick. Even though Garrett was a Southern sympathizer, he knew where his bread was buttered, and he owed his business allegiance to the Union. And he served the Union, the B&O did, for the rest of the war. Now, Kelly's primary duty during the war was protection of the B&O. Now, the B&O, there were some engineering marvels all along the way, but the 3 crown jewels of it were the Cheat River Bridge, the Buckeye Hollow Viaduct, and the Trey Run Viaduct, which were all near the town of Rollsburg, or Rouseburg. I've heard it pronounced both ways. Cheat River Bridge was a 2-span iron and wood bridge, about 312 feet long, only 27 feet above the water. The next 2, the Buckeye Hollow Viaduct and the Trey Run Viaduct, were iron steel railroad bridges, and they were the first in the United States. The Buckeye Hollow Viaduct, just about a mile west of the Cheat River Bridge, spanned a little bit longer, about 340 feet, over a deep chasm, as was the Trey Run Viaduct. And those were the absolute crown jewels of the B&O. Now, how important were those bridges, especially the Trey Run Viaduct? I'm sure you have seen the state seal of West Virginia. And I'm sure everybody knows who's on the front of a $5 bill, which will be Abraham Lincoln. And everybody should know, I think, who's on the back, or what's on the back of the $5 bill. Which will be the Lincoln Memorial. But how many people know what's on the back of the state seal of West Virginia? There aren't many. This is the back of the state seal, and right here is the Trey Run Viaduct. It's a very historic structure, and that was placed on the back of the state seal. Now, so you recognize this guy? He had stated earlier that the rupture of the river with the Cheat River would be worth to us an army. It was extremely important to the Confederates that if they could not possess the railroad, the best thing they could do was to destroy it, or just to destroy its bridges and its viaducts. There had been previous attempts on Rollsburg, which again was the location of those bridges. One attempt was made by Colonel George Porterfield. He was under orders to destroy, except he got a little bit, he didn't have the men he thought he would have, and he got chased out of Grafton to Philippi, and then got chased out of Philippi the first night battle of the Civil War. So he never was able to do that. His replacement was General Garnett, Robert Selden Garnett, and he was tasked with destroying all that, except he had the first general killed in the Civil War, so that never amounted to anything. And then John Imboden, at the time, had led a group of partisan rangers. And he made a couple of attempts on those bridges and on Rollsburg. One in August and I think one in November. And both times, he was discovered. His band wasn't that big. Since the Federals knew he was coming both times, he had to turn back. So there had never been a successful assault on Rollsburg. And then this fellow came along, John Hance McNeil, led the McNeil's Rangers. He was based near Moorfield in Hardy County. And he came to Imboden with a plan. And the plan involved a quick lightning strike with only about 600 to 700 men. It wasn't a force big enough to draw attention, and it was big enough to fight off any enemy that would stand in his way. So Imboden liked the plan, and he sent McNeil to Richmond, to Secretary of War James Seddon. The targets of that plan would be the Cheat River Bridge that we just mentioned, the Buckeye Hollow Viaduct, and the Trey Run Viaduct. Those were the main targets. And it was so that the destruction of those three structures would severely cripple the Union war effort. Well, Seddon, pictured here, he approved the plan, but he said it has to be reviewed first by General Samuel Jones, who was the department commander. And this is Jones. Now, one thing about Jones, as you'll find out about a lot of the generals on both sides actually, he didn't play well with others. He did not like to give his troops to anybody else for their use. So, what Jones did though is he gave, he agreed to give McNeil an engineer and 9 or 10 men who knew how to do the work with a demolition, with explosives to bring down those structures. But he didn't give him any men. He sent him to see General William E. Jones, also referred to as grumble. Now, if you look at that picture, he actually looks like a grumble. If I put 10 pictures up here of Confederate generals and asked you which one is nicknamed Grumble, you would know. He had that kind of mentality and temperament. So Jones kind of liked the plan, so he agreed to go along with it. In the meantime, Imboden's thinking something else. Now, he was pretty much, and so was Grumble Jones, a glory hound. And he had to figure what's in it for me. So he wanted to broaden the scope of that plan that McNeil had. So he wanted to do a couple of things. He wanted to expand the plan. He figured by going through with a bigger force, he could draw recruits into the Army as they went through northwestern Virginia. He was kind of successful, but not really, and I'll explain that here in a little bit. He wanted to bring down all the bridges on the B&O, and he wanted to liberate cattle and horses for use by the Confederate Army. So he had grander schemes than just destroying those 3 little bridges and viaducts. So he went to Lee. Lee approved the plan, and he assigned General Jones, Grumble Jones, to act as a diversion. Well, Grumble Jones said, I'm not playing second fiddle to this guy. So he went to Lee and he campaigned to reverse roles with Imboden. And he said that his cavalry brigade, the Laurel Cavalry, were much more seasoned than Imboden's relatively green troops. He was actually right about that, so Lee agreed to switch roles, and Jones would lead the assault on Rollsburg and the bridges, and Imboden would act as a diversion. So the grand plan rolled around on April the 20th of 1863. This is when the raids started. Now, something else very important happened on April the 20th of 1863. President Lincoln signed the proclamation that West Virginia would become a state in 60 days on June 20th of 1863. So, if you follow the map, if you've got it, look down, the dashed line at the bottom, Imboden's route, Imboden left from Staunton and headed north for Beverly. So he's going from here to here. Jones, on the other hand, would leave from his camp at Lacey Springs and head north toward Rollsburg. The combined forces of Imboden and Jones were about 5,300 men. Pretty substantial force. Keep that number in mind because it's going to go down as he goes through there. Now the intent again was to disrupt the B&O. They wanted to also cut telegraph lines, wreak havoc in northwest Virginia, isolate the government of the restored government in Virginia in Wheeling, but the two commands did not communicate well with each other. On the evening of April 20th, when they started, Imboden's force camped at a place called Camp Bartow, near the river. You can see here where the river is. This whole area was Camp Bartow. Imboden was told that a Yankee scout named John Slade had been through the area not too long ago and headed for Beverly. Imboden wanted to make sure that he got to that Yankee scout before he was able to give the alarm. So he sent a detachment after him. However, Slayton had to detour around some Confederate pickets, and he actually never did arrive on time to give the alarm in Beverly. But Imboden had to assume that they knew he was coming. So he approached Beverly on April the 24th. Now, before I go any further, just a little sidebar here. This is the courthouse in Beverly. It looks like these guys are ready for a fight. They absolutely are. But this picture was taken in 1890. It's the only picture I could find of the courthouse in Beverly. And I did a little bit of digging and found out that Beverly was the county seat of Randolph County. Elkins had been settled. The area of Elkins was actually called Leedsville. Senator Hart, Senator Davis became enamored with the place. He wanted to establish his business there. So he had the town incorporated and named it Elkins after his son-in-law, Senator Stephen Elkins. So if you can put those two together, Davis and Elkins College. But when Elkins was incorporated, they said, hey, we want to have the county seat here. So there was almost a war between Beverly and Elkins. They rounded up and they were ready to fight. And the courthouse was actually, by mysterious, they built a new courthouse to make sure that the county seat stayed in Beverly, but somehow, under mysterious circumstances, it burned to the ground. And eventually, Elkins did get the county seat, and there was no blood shed. So I thought that was an interesting side fact there. But anyway, on April the 24th, he's approaching, Imboden that is approaching Beverly. About 5 miles from Beverly, the cavalry advanced and encountered a man who was actually the sheriff of Randolph County. He was a known unionist. His name was Jesse Ferris. And they were afraid he was going to give the alarm. They chased him. He actually got shot, but he managed to get to Beverly and give the warning. So as they got closer, the Confederates began with skirmishing with the Federal troops and some long-range artillery. As they got closer to the town, more skirmishing began. Colonel George R. Latham was in command of the troops at Beverly, and he had, about the time that the Confederates approached within canister range, he received orders from his commanding officer to withdraw, if practicable. It's one of my favorite words in the Civil War, if practicable. And retreat, and that's what he did. He didn't wait around to see if he could hold on. As soon as he was given that option, he was out of there. So he did return, he retreated back to Philippi. Now, Imboden know that all these troops are in Philippi, bypassed Philippi, and he occupied Buchanan. He didn't have any resistance. So once he got to Buchanan, he replenished his supplies, let his men rest, and waited for a rendezvous with Jones. Meanwhile, Jones is heading north. He reached a place in Hardy County called Greenland Gap. This is a picture, this is in the 1940s, 50s, I think it's 1940s. This is Greenland Gap. Not very wide enough only for the road and the stream that ran right next to it. And Captain Martin Wallace and the 23rd Illinois Infantry occupied the western end. That's way back here. This is the eastern end. And he occupied a 2-story log church at the western end. And Captain Jacob Smith, about 100 yards away from him, commanding the 6th West Virginia, which was still at that time the Virginia Infantry. It didn't become West Virginia until June the 20th. So the Confederates advanced pretty closely, and Jones sent in a message under a flag of truce demanding a surrender. But this was the reply that Captain Martin Wallace sent back. Go back with the rag. I don't care if he has 1,000,000 men. I will not surrender until compelled. Bold words, considering he was so vastly outnumbered. The Confederates closed in, got closer, exchanged rifle fire with Wallace's men. Eventually they charged, got close enough, set the church on fire, and he then surrendered, but not before he threw all the weapons and arms into the fire so the Confederates would not get them. So that was just a little minor inconvenience for Jones. He was going to still head north, but he continues north, but he sends Colonel Asher Harmon right here on a little side job. He sent Colonel Asher Harmon to a place called Oakland, and Harmon's troops succeeded in destroying a couple of bridges there. Meanwhile, while he's doing that, Jones finally launches an attack on Rollsburg, April the 26th of 1863. Initially, the attack was repulsed. And Jones, now you got to remember, what was the primary target of the raid? Those 3 bridges in Rollsburg. Initially, the first attack was repulsed, and Jones did not like the way his orders were executed. So he called it off and continued on to Morgantown. So right away, you know that one of the main things I wanted to do wasn't going to get done. So if he'd have kept up attacking, he was going to win, because there were only 300 men defending Rollsburg. He had thousands. But he went to Morgantown. Meanwhile, Harmon continued on to Kingwood and Morgantown, took both of those places without resistance. Now, once you get to Morgantown, just south of Morgantown, he rendezvoused with Jones. So Harmon is back with Jones now. Instead of proceeding, now it's a little bit south of Morgantown, instead of proceeding further south, Jones decided he's going to go back to Morgantown. There was a bridge there that he wanted to destroy. Wasn't on the B&O, but he was going to destroy another bridge. So they turned back, went to Morgantown, and Morgantown surrendered for the second time in 2 days. And his troops were crossing the bridge, and the bridge slipped off its moorings on one side of the river, and it was only hung only by its cables. And Jones figured, well, that's enough damage. I'm going to turn around and go south again. So he goes south. What's just south of Morgantown was Fairmont. So he goes down to Fairmont, and he met very little resistance. He destroyed a railroad bridge, captured 260 men who were paroled. Fairmont was the hometown of one Francis H. Pierpont, who was the governor of the restored government of Virginia. So once they found out that he had a library there, so they destroyed the library knowing that it was Pierpont's. They didn't bring that bridge down, but they sure destroyed the library. And that was one feather in his cap, or so he said. Now Jones and Imboden finally got together. They finally united, but now their force, and when they started out, over 5,000, almost 5,300 men, now their force was down to a little over 3,000. There was some disease, but most of those numbers are due to desertions. So even though they recruited a few men, that was offset by the desertions. So Jones had some intel that there was a large force near Clarksburg, about 8,000 men. So he bypasses Clarksburg and moves to Weston. At Weston, he sends Colonel Harmon on another little side job to destroy a few more bridges. When he realized that there was no way that they could attack the 8,000 troops at Clarksburg, they separated their commands. Imboden went south, down through Summersville, down through this way, and went to clear a path back to the valley from where he started. But he sent Harmon again to West Union. Now, we're in a whole lot of men at West Union. The Federals there were about 300, 600 men. But there was not a fight when Harmon looked up on a ridge and saw a line of cannon. He didn't have artillery with his force. So he's going up against this force that had a row of cannons. The troops at West Union were under the command of a very unique officer. His name was John Carroll. And once they saw those cannon, they got out of Dodge. And they went to rendezvous again with Jones. What they didn't know was those cannon that lined that ridge were actually empty flour barrels that had been painted to look like cannons. So they were referred to after that point as Carroll's cannons. Now those bridges that Harmon destroyed, These are the two bridges. They have been reconstructed. Nothing runs over them now. Those were actually the location of where those bridges were. Now, when Harmon Reed joined Jones, they proceeded west to a place called Burning Springs. I showed you a picture of what that looks like today. It's a nice little roadside park in Wirt County. I drove down there one day. Pretty cool little park. But Burning Springs was on the Little Canal River. And at that time, it was the largest. This boggles my mind. It was the largest oil-producing region in the world. So what Jones did was to destroy that place, set everything on fire, destroyed 80 wells. He said he destroyed 200,000 barrels of oil. I think he added an extra zero in his report just to make himself look good, because there was no way he destroyed 200,000 barrels of oil. It was more like 20,000. But he left after the destruction. While it was burning, the flames could be seen for miles as far as Parkersburg. He left the town the next morning. What he wrote in his report: by the dark, the oil from the tanks on the burning creek had reached the river. The whole stream became a sheet of fire. A burning river carrying destruction to our merciless enemy was a scene of magnificence that might well carry joy to every patriotic heart, every Confederate patriotic heart. So they stuck around that night. They left the next morning, but not until after they consumed 20 barrels of confiscated whiskey. So they were feeling pretty good at that time. And Burning Springs would not become a major oil-producing area until well after the Civil War had ended. And this is Burning Springs today, what it looks like. This is all that's left. A few things on this side and on that side. It's a neat little park. It's a self-guided tour. If you're ever past near Elizabeth, West Virginia, it's a nice place to visit. Self-guided tour, take less than an hour, but it's really interesting. Now, despite the heavy rains and the muddy roads, Confederates continued on. You can follow their route. Going down through Sutton to Summersville. At Summersville, they rested for a few days, about 6 to 7 days. Eventually made their way to Lewisburg and back to the Shenandoah Valley. So, as far as the aftermath was concerned, the primary objective of the raid was never achieved. The three main things that they wanted to destroy, that never happened. They did destroy bridges. This is not one of the bridges they destroyed. This is a bridge, railroad bridge over the Potomac at Harper's Ferry. But the bridges that were destroyed, it was a minor inconvenience because the B&O had stockpiled materials nearby, and many times within hours after the Confederates left, men were back rebuilding those bridges and repairing the railroad tracks. So workers again would often begin right after the Confederates left. One bridge was built. Within 5 days, track was laid, and the train continued to function on that line. He had hoped for some new recruits. They did get recruits, but the numbers that they gained were offset by the desertions. There were way more desertions than there were troops that they gathered. Again, they wanted to recount it with the government, the restored government of Virginia. That really did not happen. Convention in Wheeling was slightly disrupted, but the government in Wheeling was never threatened. In the havoc and destruction that occurred, that caused the public opinion to intensify against the Confederacy, even among Southern sympathizers. The livestock, that was about the only good thing that they did. They captured, again, over 4,000 head of cattle, a number of horses, but those cattle were able to sustain the Army of Northern Virginia through the winter of 1863 into 1864. So aside from the capture of the cattle, the Jones and Imboden raid could be considered an abject failure. It did not work. Perhaps if they had stuck to the original plan that Hans McNeil had proposed, those bridges in all likelihood would have been destroyed. But since General Imboden and General Jones, again, were typically glory hounds, they wanted to glorify themselves, they decided to make it a larger plan, and obviously that backfired on them. And that, in a nutshell, is the Jones and Imboden raid.